Hi everyone, welcome to Revelizations. I'm your host, Brian James. This episode is going to be a bit heavy, but I believe it's an important topic to discuss. On September 10th, 2025, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. For anyone who doesn't know who Charlie Kirk was, he was the founder and president of Turning Point USA, a grassroots conservative organization. What he's probably best known for, at least to me, was going to college campuses, setting up a tent, and inviting anyone and everyone to come up to him and ask him questions. Whether they were political, social, economy-based, or spiritual in nature, he welcomed discourse. For the most part, I did my best to avoid his style of content and the content of similar people like Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, from the sort. Not because I disagree with what they believe, but because, in large, I do find myself agreeing with more of their political and social stances than not. I avoid that type of content because I don't think it's wise to only seek out information that you agree with. And a lot of times, that style of content is meant to be what's called dunking on the opposition, where basically you make the other person look stupid through various means like creating a scarecrow representation of their viewpoints, using whataboutisms, where instead of engaging with legitimate critiques of your own stances, you quickly deflect and redirect by saying, well, what about when your side does? And then fill in the blank. Or by engaging in logical fallacies, and the list goes on. Charlie Kirk wasn't perfect. He wasn't always above using these methods in debates, but what I found and continue to find when I watch videos of Charlie Kirk is that he really seemed interested in having good faith conversations. Many times in his videos where he is debating with people, he would say, let's find agreement where we can and clarity on where we still disagree. He, like many people, could see the direction America is heading, one where conversations with those who disagree with you are becoming rarer and rarer. Then when they do occur, it isn't a conversation. It's bumper sticker slogans being shouted at one another with neither side interested in listening to the other. There's a clip at what looks like the early days of him doing his college campus tours. A lady asks him, why is he doing this? Why is he going to college campuses and engaging in conversations with people who disagree with him? He responds by saying, because when people stop talking, that's when violence happens. That's when civil war happens. Because you start to think that the other side is so evil, they lose their humanity. Charlie Kirk believed in free speech, the discussion of ideas as a means to avoid violence. In that same conversation, he had a follow-up point. He also does this because when he does, people come out of the woodwork. Today, I'm coming out of the woodwork to honor his legacy. I can't think of a better way for me to honor his life, one that was dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and peaceful conversation with people who disagreed with him, than to use my voice to encourage a thoughtful approach to ideas, since the continued use of his voice was stolen from him. I found out about Charlie Kirk's death from social media. I just finished a podcast conversation with one of my guests and was taking a moment to change gears. I opened Twitter, and the first post I saw was a cryptic message from Elon Musk saying he saw the shot in hopes that Charlie would be all right. The next post I saw confirmed it was Charlie Kirk who was shot, and then the post after that was the video of Charlie Kirk being assassinated. I felt physically sick after watching the footage of what ended up being his last conscious moments before he was shot in the neck. I spent the rest of the day in a fog. I scrolled social media, learning as much as I could about the situation, reading and watching the reactions of the internet, and listening to what mainstream media had to say about what happened. As shameless and as bad as some of the hot takes were, it doesn't compare to what was in store for the next day. I can't find the words to accurately capture my responsive feelings to the vile, putrid sentiment of certain people's reaction. I can't imagine the inner rot of the hearts from those celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It was shocking, saddening, and enraging. Judging from the responses of other people who have seen those videos, I know I'm not alone. It's actually those responses, the reactions from people mourning the loss of Charlie Kirk, responding to the people celebrating his death, that served as the catalyst for me to make this episode. I see the responses of people saying that they're done talking. The illusion has lifted and the reality has settled. There's an insurmountable rift that can no longer be overcome by dialogue. Even the government said they are considering pursuing hate speech charges for the people celebrating his murder on social media. These responses beg the question in me: how would Charlie Kirk want his supporters, loved ones, the government, to respond to his murder? Would he want retaliation, an eye for an eye? Would he want to see the United States erupt in violence over his death? Or would he want people to respond differently? Unfortunately, we don't get to ask him how he would want us to move forward from his death. However, he did leave instructions for us by way of example in how he chose to live his life and in the teachings of Jesus that inform the choices he'd make. I get it. Who am I to speculate how Charlie Kirk would want those who cared for him to respond to his murder? I didn't know him personally. I've only been aware of him for the past few years. I don't think I'm anyone special. I'm not trying to disrespect anyone or tell anyone how they should grieve. All I'm doing is seeing the fallout of anger and sadness and wondering how we can best accurately and productively honor him. I think one way is to ask, how did Charlie Kirk live his life? What did he believe in? In answering those questions, we can thoughtfully, not reactively, respond to his murder. Charlie believed in relationships. The relationship with one's family, blood or chosen. He believed in having a good and healthy marriage. He believed in having kids and passing down your values to them. Most importantly, he believed in having a relationship with Jesus Christ. And it's the importance he placed on this last relationship, the one with Jesus, that we should use to guide us on how to remember and respond to Charlie Kirk's death. Not because this is how I think he would want to be remembered, but because this is how he said he wanted to be remembered in death. During an interview, Charlie was specifically asked, "How do you want to be remembered?" It sounded like the question caught him off guard. He said, "If I die?" The interviewer said, "Yeah, all of this goes away." Then Charlie answered, "He wants to be remembered for courage for my faith. My faith is the most important thing to me," is how he responded. He wanted to be remembered as someone who had conviction in his faith and spoke boldly in that conviction. It is that confidence in his relationship with Jesus that instructed every other part of his life. And if you are concerned with how to best honor him with your actions in the wake of his death, whether you share his beliefs or not, it is the principles of his faith that we should use as a guiding compass. Should we not do that, then we are acting in our own definition of justice, which is an option. But then don't say what you're doing is for Charlie Kirk, because it won't be, since anything that deviates from Christianity wouldn't be something he endorses. Now that we know what was most important to Charlie Kirk, we can confidently look at scriptural examples of how Jesus acted when confronted with similar situations in his life as chronicled in the Gospels. As we move into the next part of this episode, it's important to note that I'm not trying to deify Charlie Kirk or turn him into a modern-day saint. Charlie was a human, fallible, and susceptible to the entire spectrum of human emotions and the reactions that succumbing to those emotions would elicit. However, in the clearest of minds, I'm confident that any Christian will look to Jesus on how to act day to day, and even more so in the face of overwhelming difficulty. Charlie being a Christian, it makes me confident sharing my conclusions on how I think he would want those who called him family, a friend, mentor to act after his murder. Another important thing to note is that it is a core belief of Christianity that we as Christians are to be transformed to be more and more Christ-like each day. It would be reasonable for someone listening to this to come to the conclusion that with these comparisons of Jesus to scenarios similar to Charlie's, that I'm drawing some equivalency to one another. So let me be redundantly clear. I do not think Charlie was some messianic figure, a prophet, or religious authority. He was a dude who lived his life guided by religious convictions. Nothing more, nothing less. With the disclaimers exhaustively laid out, there are certain post-assassination reactions I want to comment on and hopefully illuminate another way to think and respond to them. I want to address the calls to violence, the calls to cease dialogue with people who think differently than you, the calls to govern people's speech who you disagree with. And I'd like to talk a little about the ridicule and mischaracterization of Charlie that continues to follow him even in death. In doing so, I'll point to biblical parallels and how Jesus acted and instructs us how to act. So let's look to Scripture and see what Charlie believed and infer how to move forward. The most common response I saw to Charlie's assassination was anger, which is understandable. A prominent voice, someone who encouraged the thoughtful debate of ideas in lieu of violence, was killed by someone who disagreed with him. Not only that, but large amounts of people openly celebrated his death by cheering, dancing, taking words Charlie said out of context and then flipping them to justify why it's acceptable to revel in his murder, and then upload it on social media for everyone to see. And instead of realizing they shouldn't have responded that way, they were only emboldened when more people came out and doubled down on this belief, even going so far as to protest, disrupt, and destroy impromptu vigils and memorials. How could you not feel anger? How could you not react in anger? I know that left to my own devices, this is what seems natural. If someone pushes you, push them back. Then that idea can be escalated. If someone hurts someone you love or kills someone you love, then it seems only fair that you should cause that pain back to them. If you play that scenario out, it doesn't take long to realize that the cycle of anger and hatred will never stop. The law of karma, retributive justice, an eye for an eye, there are many examples of this in religion and society. But what did Jesus say and do when met with hostility? An example is in Matthew, which is one of the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. There is a sermon that Jesus delivers that's called the Sermon on the Mount. In this sermon, Jesus addresses many cultural and spiritual issues. One of the issues he talks about is retaliation. He starts off by saying, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth," because this was the practice of the time for the Israelites. In Leviticus, a book of the Old Testament, it says whatever injury that someone has done to another, it will be given back to them. Fracture for fracture, an eye for an eye, and tooth for tooth. To briefly further go into the weeds, one of the purposes of Jesus' life was to fulfill the law and rewrite it. The law being the guiding principles of the Old Testament that instructed the Jewish people how to live their lives so they could avoid sin and be in proper relation with God. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus was addressing this law, do unto others what's been done to you, and essentially rewriting it. So Jesus said, hey, you've been taught retribution and retaliation are acceptable, but I say to you, do not resist the one who does evil things to you. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So no, because someone has hurt you, don't go looking to repay the score. A little bit later in the sermon, Jesus continues saying things that I imagine probably sound like nails on a chalkboard. He says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. For if you love those who love you, and if you greet only your brother, what more are you doing than others? He's basically saying, you've been called to be separate from the rest of the world. So when something bad happens to you, don't respond like everyone else would. Be different. Be humble. Be compassionate. Be forgiving. Be love.